Rebecca Hoffmann was summoned by the secret police on a rainy Monday in 1961. It began as an ordinary morning. Her husband drove her to work in his tan Trabant 500. The graceful old streets of central Berlin still had gaps from wartime bombing, except where new concrete buildings stood up like ill-matched false teeth. Hans was thinking about his job as he drove. The courts served the judges, the lawyers, the police, the government, everyone except the victims of crime, he said. This is to be expected in Western capitalist countries, but under communism, the courts ought surely to serve the people. My colleagues don't seem to realize that. Hans worked for the Ministry of Justice. We've been married almost a year, and I've known you for 2, but I've never met one of your colleagues, Rebecca said. They would bore you, he said immediately. They're all lawyers. Any women among them? No, not in my section anyway. Hans's job was administration, appointing judges, scheduling trials, managing courthouses. I'd like to meet them all the same. Hans was a strong man who had learned to rein himself in. Watching him, Rebecca saw in his eyes a familiar flash of anger at her insistence. He controlled it by an effort of will. I'll arrange something, he said. Perhaps we'll all go to a bar one evening. Hans had been the first man Rebecca had met who matched up to her father. He was confident and authoritative, but he always listened to her. He had a good job. Not many people had a car of their own in East Germany. And men who worked in the government were usually hardline communists, but Hans, surprisingly, shared Rebecca's political skepticism. Like her father, he was tall, handsome, and well-dressed. He was the man she had been waiting for. When they'd been dating for a year and sleeping together most weekends for 6 months, Rebecca wondered why he did not ask her to marry him. They were not kids. She had then been 28, he 33, so she proposed to him. He'd been startled, but said yes. Now he pulled up outside her school. It was a modern building and well-equipped. The communists were serious about education. Outside the gates, 5 or 6 older boys were standing under a tree, smoking cigarettes. Ignoring their stares, Rebecca kissed Hans on the lips, then she got out. The boys greeted her politely, but she felt their yearning adolescent eyes on her figure as she splashed through the puddles in the schoolyard. In the staff room, she checked the emergency timetable on the notice board. Most of her classes were doubled today. 2 groups of pupils crammed into 1 room. Her subject was Russian, but she also had to teach an English class. She did not speak English, though she'd picked up a smattering from her British grandmother, Maud, still feisty at 70. This was the second time Rebecca had been asked to teach an English class, and she began to think about a text. The first time, she'd used a leaflet handed out to American soldiers, telling them how to get on with Germans. The pupils had found it hilarious, and they'd learned a lot too. Today, perhaps she would write on the blackboard the words of a song they knew, such as The Twist, played all the time on American Forces Network radio, and get them to translate it into German. It would not be a conventional lesson, but it was the best she could do. The school was desperately short of teachers because half the staff had emigrated to West Germany, where salaries were 300 marks a month higher, and people were free. The story was the same in most schools in East Germany, and it was not just teachers. Doctors could double their earnings by moving west. Rebecca's mother, Carla, was head of nursing at a large East Berlin hospital, and she was tearing her hair out at the scarcity of both nurses and doctors. The story was the same in industry and even the armed forces. It was a national crisis. As Rebecca was scribbling the lyrics of The Twist in a notebook, trying to remember the line about My Little Sis, the deputy head came into the staff room. Bert Helt was probably Rebecca's best friend outside her family. He was a slim, dark-haired man of 40 with a livid scar across his forehead where a shard of flying shrapnel had struck him while defending the Zelo Heights in the last days of the war. He taught physics, but he shared Rebecca's interest in Russian literature, and they ate their lunchtime sandwiches together a couple of times a week. Listen, everybody, Bernd said. Bad news, I'm afraid. Anselm has left us. There was a murmur of surprise. Anselm Weber was the head teacher. He was a loyal communist, heads had to be, but it seemed his principles had been overcome by the appeal of West German prosperity and liberty. As Berndt detailed the emergency arrangements, Rebecca wondered when the school would get its new head. A year from now? How long would this crisis go on? No one knew. Before the first lesson, she glanced into her pigeonhole, but it was empty. The mail had not yet arrived. Perhaps the postman had gone to West Germany too. The letter that would turn her life upside down was still on its way.